we have played a huge contribution going all the way back to the time when you were in Moscow. You've already discussed the fact that you weren't getting the support then from the US government that you needed in order to do the kind of things that could have been done, which might have consolidated peace then and changed the political situation. And of course, there's no recognition of that today, none at all. I mean, everything that happened at that time isn't discussed, and the enlargement of NATO isn't discussed, and it's almost heresy to suggest that it had any contribution, had any role in the start of the war at all. You want to say anything quickly about that before we?
Yeah, I just want to say that, one of the biggest problems, and it's pervasive, is the U.S. government lies about everything and lies relentlessly. It's not the only one. British government does the same and other governments do the same, but the lying is non-stop. So we don't really even know, except by trying to parse the, whatever evidence or crumbs or leaks or whistleblowers tell us what's really going on, what is going on. But what we do know now is how America's top diplomats for 30 years warned against the American policy approach. And one of the most important warnings that everyone can find online is a memo by our current CIA director, William Burns, who in 2008 was the US ambassador to Russia. And he wrote a memo called Niet means Niet. And it was, that is a red line to extend NATO to Ukraine. And he said, it's not just Putin, it's the entire political class. It doesn't matter, pro-Putin, anti-Putin, all Russian leaders say Niet means Niet. Now, the reason I mentioned secrecy in this context, we never even know about this except for WikiLeaks. Because the American people, who should tell the American people what our top diplomat in Russia thinks about the most crucial issue that could get us all killed? The American people, they're completely incidental to this story. No one tells them anything, and no one admits anything. And so there's been so much lying about the failure of negotiations. Why did the negotiations break down in March 2022? Because the U.S. stopped Ukraine from agreeing with Russia on neutrality. How do we know that? Because I know it because people have told me that were involved in the negotiations, but I also know it because Naftali Bennett, who was an informal mediator, happened to blurt it out in an interview, which is quite fascinating to look at because it's a little weird how just open he talks. He says, yeah, we were reaching an agreement. We were in the 7th draft. They were about to sign. Then the United States came in and stopped it. And by the way, you know why he says they stopped it? Because, well, I disagreed, Bennett says, but, they wanted to look tough to China. Are you kidding? This is a war not even about Ukraine. It's about China, and not even about China, but about looking tough to China. And by the way, Stoltenberg, who really is someone I've known for a long time, and he is I can't even say it publicly anymore, what I think about him, even though I used to be friends with him when he was Prime Minister of Norway. Disgusting. But today he says, we can't look soft because China will see us looking soft. This is the way to get us all killed, by the way. But I want to come back to the secrecy point. We wouldn't know what these diplomats said, except that they get leaked or they get released, or once in a while, one of them reflects after the fact in their memoirs how dangerous the time was. William Perry tells us afterwards, I thought about resigning because of NATO enlargement. I was so much against it. It was so dangerous. But then I thought maybe I shouldn't resign and so forth. He's a wonderful man. He should have resigned. The public should have understood this much earlier. But these things are not told. And we never got an accounting of why the negotiations broke down in March 2022. So the mainstream media just go completely silent. They don't even ask a question. And it's this secrecy which allows a small group, Biden, Newland, Blinken, Sullivan, I'm sure, obviously Raytheon and others are happy in the military-industrial complex and the Armed Services Committee. They're happy, but it's a tiny group that is calling these policies. And these are crazy policies, and they're absolutely dangerous. And I think the Cuban Missile Crisis, to come back to that, taught us, most of the opinion of these elites, which was always pointing to war solutions, would have gotten us all killed. And that's why it's so crazy that we're in the situation we're in right now. One mild saving grace is that all the European pro-war leaders are unpopular and becoming more and more unpopular, and Biden is very unpopular. So none of this is winning any political support. And if they actually took the issue to the people in our countries, the public would be dead set against what we're doing right now, because we're gambling with Armageddon, to quote a title of a wonderful book about the Cuban Missile Crisis, for no reason, because we could have reached peace in December 2021 when Putin put absolutely valid, real propositions on the table that should have been negotiated. The U.S. rejected that. We could have reached peace in March 2022 when they came close to signing an agreement that the United States stopped, and we could reach peace now, even now. But they don't want to negotiate.
Because this is the problem. They don't want to negotiate, and then by not making negotiations possible now, it seems to me that they're making negotiations more difficult in the future.
Of course, everything gets harder. Everything gets harder. And, in 2021, in December 17, when President Putin put the U.S.-Russia security agreement on the table, there was no talk, by the way, about territory at that time or about annexation of Lugansk and Donetsk and so forth. This was about the Minsk II agreement, an agreement that was reached, not only signed by Ukraine, but actually endorsed 15-0 by the UN Security Council. And more than that, guaranteed, quote unquote, by France and Germany. Russia wasn't making demands to annex territory. Everything becomes harder when you have war. This is clear. That's why these guys, it's so mindless. And by the way, I think I mentioned to you, I called the White House after Putin put those propositions on the table. I was able to have my say for an hour, but I was told point blank, we will not negotiate over NATO. And I told them, you're going to have war. This is absolutely reckless. So there we are.
Do you get the sense that there is a policy debate now underway in Washington and that the wind is starting to change? I've started to see articles appearing. I mean, there was Mr. Charab. I don't know whether you know him, but
yeah.
He does seem
I
to
don't
be
know
an
him
interesting.
Personally.
He does seem to be an interesting man, and he's making some comments now. He talked about an unwinnable war in Ukraine. You get the sense that I get the sense that, of course, this is from London. It's a long way away here in London from what's going on in Washington. But I do get the sense that there are some people who are saying this is going too far. We've invested too much in this. It is getting too unpredictable. It is going on for too long. And we've had other articles appearing. There was a very I didn't like the article, but it was in Politico about, our military position is depleting, all of those sort of things. I mean, do you get the sense that there is now some doubt starting to grow in some parts of the American government, and that this might eventually lead us back to some kind of a compromise, even if not perhaps quite as coherent a compromise as the one that President Kennedy came to in the 1960s?
So first, it's interesting to say about Rand. Rand is solid U.S. defense. I mean, that's how it was set up for the U.S. Air Force and so on. But interestingly, and I've followed Rand obviously for 40 years, they do honest analysis, which is interesting because there are very few places where you get honest analysis. So that article is insightful. That guy is quite insightful. Rand has been telling us for years, as you've been reporting, and as we know, don't get into a long war. It's not in American interest. And so Rand, I give a lot of credit to Rand for, in the midst of all of this complete mindless politicization, to actually do analysis. This is quite different from, say, British intelligence, what garbage passes for what's claimed to be. This is real analysis. So I think that is first important to note. Washington is so pathetic right now. First of all, it's all geared towards nothing but 2024. So we're constantly in election mode. Election mode means money mode, and it means lobbying mode. So it's never really an honest debate. If there's a debate, it's about, what does this mean for Biden's reelection? What should he do for Biden's reelection? It's not an analytical debate. It's not how do we save the world debate. It's spin. What do we say? How do we maneuver? Of course, there are different points of view. A lot of people could see this is not working out very well. But things are driven so relentlessly by very short-term theatrical considerations that I wouldn't give a lot of hope to kind of high-minded rethinking. Who knows? But what I see is a tremendous concentration on spin and on posturing, and that is not conducive to strategy. Incidentally, by the way, even when Kennedy gave that peace speech, he hid the text of the speech from the State Department, from the Defense Department, from the security establishment until the day before, because he knew he did not want the speech stopped. So you have to have really a clever, energetic, properly directed president to begin with. And I don't think Biden fits any of that description right now. To even be able to break free of what is this overwhelming war machine. And you need to have a mind that's somehow above the spin cycle. And I don't see that right now. What I do think is absolutely happening is a consolidation of about 80% of the world in favor of negotiations. And that, to my mind, makes a very big difference. And we've discussed this, and you've been discussing this. The fact that it's not, it's China, that's hugely important. Indonesia, that's not a small thing, by the way, that the Indonesian government put on the table a peace plan. Lula, not unimportant at all, quite important, because Lula brings together the whole leadership of South America. The dynamics in the Middle East, the African leaders saying, come on, you're choking us with this. We need peace. I think what is slowly dawning on the policy types in the United States and Europe is, the world's not with us. In fact, more than that, the world's actually against us. Because for a while they were saying, well, they voted 140 countries, and now they're kind of understanding it's much worse than that. Europe's diplomacy is collapsing internationally. Europe is viewed as a small appendage to NATO. It's uninteresting for almost all the world because nobody sees anything coming out of Europe except basically parroting the U.S. line. And the U.S. is seen for what it is, which is, most of the world saying, we don't want to be led by you. Thank you. We'd like to trade with you. We'd like to cooperate. We don't want to be bombed by you. Thank you. But we don't want to follow you or have your sanctions regime and so on. And so all of this means that over time, the viability of this whole approach, the U.S. hegemonic approach, the NATO enlargement approach, the war approach, even for the military logistics and armament side, it's less and less viable. I don't think the U.S. will be the first one to to break ranks on this, actually, because of our strange, corrupted politics. But I do think that the weight of the world opinion really coming together to say, come on, stop already, is actually going to, one way or another, make the difference. I hope it makes the difference before we get things completely out of hand. And to come back to where I started, there's in a nuclear confrontation, in a nuclear age, 1,600 deployed nuclear weapons on both sides, a lot of not so very clever people in the U.S. leadership. You just can't be complacent day by day thinking it's somehow all going to come out right, because there are too many stupid people around, too many irresponsible people. That's why I'd like to get us to the negotiations as fast as possible, not give time for what I know is complete irresponsibility. By the way, when I've been at Harvard and trained, I've seen how these people get trained. I want to negotiate. Let me put it that way.